Good evening. I'd like to call the Wilson work session together for April 12th, 2021. Thank you for coming this evening. Those of you online, those of you that are here, we're here for the feasibility study presentation. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Fadley.
Thank you, President Hart. It's my privilege this evening to welcome those of you who are joining in remotely. Welcome to our presentation regarding our district-wide feasibility update and option update. This evening, I kind of want to walk you through the agenda for our meeting tonight. The first part of the agenda I'll be handling regarding a refresher on our guiding principles, followed by an enrollment projection update. Then we'll go into the proposed phase 2 of our feasibility study, show an analysis of financing for all options that will be shown this evening. We will allow for board conversation. At the end of our presentation, and we'll talk about next steps. I do want to remind the board that at the conclusion of tonight's work session that we will be going into an executive session to talk about property. So if you the guiding principles are up on the screen. In an effort to not read everything to you, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we frame the conversation that we're going to have this evening. We are trying to stay as true to these guiding principles as are possible, understanding that there are recommendations that we will be making. Obviously, we do not have unlimited resources, so the board is going to have to make some decisions based on the administrative recommendations moving forward. But in order to highlight some of the comments that we've received over the course of the study in the last year and a half, 2 years, from our community have to do with a focus on safety. So you'll see that one of the guiding principles is that operationally our schools are safe, that we focus on the health and welfare of our students, staff, and community, effective and efficient programming for our students. We look at ways to do things in a cost-efficient manner, keeping in mind that the taxpayers, it's important that we make sure that we don't overburden our taxpayer community. That we look at capacity, not only current capacity, but we look at capacity in terms of our projected enrollments moving into the future to prepare the district for the next 15 to 20 years in terms of our recommendation. We allow equal access for all students and staff and the community, and that we make sure that our recommendations reflect the values and the input of our greater Wilson community. In addition, we look at some of the guiding principles as it relates to our educational system. Again, equity and opportunity to develop and deliver these programs in Wilson. Creating a nurturing environment that supports the whole child. You heard a lot about the whole child concept and the nurturing of our students from this administration for the past 4 years in developing that culture across Wilson. We want our students to be critical problem solvers, and we want to make sure that they have opportunities to become creative thinkers, collaborators, and communicators, and that every step of the way of their K-12 experience that they have the opportunity to grow as individuals, again, into those productive members of society, focusing on success of the whole student. We want to make sure that we provide developmentally appropriate spaces within our program, that we focus on instructional strategies that are research-based, that help students become life-ready, career-ready, and college-ready, whatever their choice is when they leave our Wilson School District K-12 experience. Again, we want a curriculum based on readiness. We want to make sure that our students have those rich, vibrant experiences. I've mentioned the whole child several times: equity, opportunity, health and wellness. So those are the framework and the guiding principles that we've utilized over the course of our feasibility study to make sure that we had a roadmap for excellence in program, for excellence in our recommendations moving forward. So at this time, I'm going to turn over the conversation to Dr. Trickett, and he's going to walk you through some conversation regarding our enrollment trends and multiple data sets that we've analyzed to this point.
Thank you, Dr. Fadley. As Dr. Fadley suggested, as we're looking at our feasibility, the process that we've used over the last 2 years is been through this lens of the operational and the educational side of the house. And while that's been occurring, during that 2-year process, our school district has grown by 200 students. Those are actual students, kids that we're serving in our school district in our current setting. We also have been now 1 full year into a global pandemic, which has created some ripples in our enrollment. Probably most notably of such, a lesser than expected number of children enrolled in kindergarten. So that 200 additional students that have come to our doors and in our classrooms was experienced while we had a roughly 80 student drop in our kindergarten enrollment. So if you would add those students, we'd be sitting here today roughly 280 students larger than we were 2 years ago. So this is just a snapshot in time, and you've seen this report. I've brought this to the board and to the community a few times previously. It just shows in real time where we sit. This report was pulled probably about 4 weeks ago when we began this project. As of today, there are 17 more students in our school district than there were when I ran this report. I really like it because it breaks it down by school and by grade level. You can see, as I've mentioned before, that in our secondary grades, 6 of our 7 secondary grades have over 500 students. To my knowledge and my review of the data, that's the first time that our school district has experienced that. Our senior class has nearly 550 students. There's an ongoing trend in our school district where we have families moving into our district, which is a celebration. Our neighboring communities, there are families, they want to live here. They want to buy homes here, they want to send their kids to our school district. So we see each year, on average, obviously there are bubbles, we tend to get more and more students as the grade levels increase. So today we have roughly 6,270 some students in our school district. This is, again, that real-time data. We have a couple different sources that we can use. We can look at to try to do some predictive analysis of where we may be. And we've been using this year of 2025, 2026 as kind of our target. And we've been racking our minds around this and trying to crunch the data to bring to our community and our board so that you can make an informed decision, an informed recommendation on how we're going to meet the operational educational needs of the school district. This data table that you see today is from Forecast 5, and it's a tool that we use in multiple sides of the house in our school district, but it really just looks at where were we over time and how would the birth rates, the census data that we're seeing locally affect the size of the school district. This is similar data that Pennsylvania Department of Education uses in their projections, which we've talked about with the board previously as well. What this data does not include is an analysis of the housing market. It does not include the types of turnovers that we're seeing in our local communities. It does not include the roughly 700 dwellings that we've talked about that are coming to our school district that we know about, nor does it include the dwellings that could be coming, residential homes, apartments, condos, and so forth, down the road that we're not yet aware of. We've also talked a lot about Decision Insight, and Decision Insight is a tool that we used. We did give them our enrollment data from 2016 moving forward, and then they went to work with some of our local municipalities to try to get a handle on these trends. They looked at the trends, they looked at the developments, and they tried to project for us using two different models. The first model that you see here is what they coin as their conservative model, and it takes us out to 2029. We don't know what it's going to look like in 2029, so we've been very focused on this 2025 school year. So you can see again, denoted in gray is the column 2025, and we start to see some trends. Right away, what strikes me is that all the way through our system, K all the way through grade 12, every single grade is projected to be at 500 students. That's a large number, starting especially in our primary and our early learning grades. There are some bubbles, obviously, throughout time and how our trends are already showing. We have 550 kids in the senior class. We have 480 in the junior class. It's just the way that the cycle works. But that's a large number. They're projecting in 2025 conservatively that we'll be at 6,792 students. They also have what they consider a moderate projection. The moderate projection obviously is a much higher number. In this particular model, it's showing 7,207 students. We're not suggesting that that's the case. We're just presenting to you that there's two different models that they run. One is conservative and one is moderate. They used a lot of terminology with us, as we've used with you before, which they call the line of best fit. The line of best fit is simply the average between conservative and moderate, mapped out through 2025 and beyond. So then we dug a little bit deeper, and we said, well, where are our kids? Where are the kids that come to our schools every day? And we worked to analyze each of our sending areas, and this map represents all of our elementary schools. It's a little hard to see. Hopefully in the packet it shows up a little bit better. Hopefully the stream, you can see the red designated areas. But you will also notice within the dots, which represent children, there are little school buildings. So this is Spring Ridge Elementary School. Here's Green Valley in West, Whitfield, Cornwall Terrace in Southern, and Shiloh Hills. So you can see the density. This is really a density map showing where all the students are, all of the children who come to our school buildings. You see it's very densely populated in areas that we would expect, which is where a lot of our neighborhood schools are. The other thing that this map indicates is at the time of the study, where other or additional housing developments were approved to begin. So we have up along, back behind Penn State Berks, this is the one small area. If you drive through there, as I'm sure you do, you'll notice that I think they're pretty much wrapped up with the new construction at that site. Back off of State Hill Road, off of, is it Schweitzer? Schweitzer. Again, at the time that we worked on this study and analyzed this data, there were no homes in this particular neighborhood. If you drive by there today, there are quite a few, and it's my understanding that they're moving and selling at a pretty quick pace. You have a couple different building projects over here along the Green Valley West area, and actually recent learning is that there's another property containing roughly 30 homes that will begin to break ground across the street from West Middle School. You have a couple parcels that exist that we've discussed as a board in kind of the heart of our school district. Again, those projects are moving quickly, and Mr. Simcox can elaborate on that possibly later on. And there are some other properties that are potentially coming our way. When we look at the properties that are here, just as a reminder, break them down, and if all of these things are realized, if the market continues, if homes continue to be built, if people move into these homes, we're looking at about 700 properties, which is a mix between apartments, duplex-type environments, and single-family homes. So from an operational and educational perspective, these are the things that we're planning for. We're planning for how do we accommodate this growth? How do we create a system that in 2024-25 is ready for an influx of children? The other piece to this is, as the board considers and discusses what option is best for our school district and our students, we need to consider if we would build, if we would have to move to a project, a construction project, where it should be located. So looking at the density, looking at where some new neighborhoods may be coming, may help inform the board to make a stronger recommendation. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Stout, who will talk through phase 2 of the feasibility project.
Thanks so much, Dr. Trickett. So when we talk about entering phase 2, we should really go back and visit where we had been in our last discussions in November on the topic of phase 2. It was brought to sort of consensus that this board agreed that we have a need to address the overcrowding of our elementary schools, and that came up on our Mentimeter survey as something that was a primary concern. So at that time, we discussed some options about potentially creating a new elementary school. We talked about what middle school could look like, potential grade realignment, where we would go to a 5-6 school and a 7-8 school. And we kind of moved through those options and let it at that point because we were not ready yet for phase 2. At this time, since we're talking about phase 2, we'd like to revisit and go back to our thinking from November, but connect it to our current best thinking. At the time, we didn't know about possible design details. And when we did gain more information since November about design details, it became obvious that Lincoln Park would no longer be a viable option for a building location for a 600+ student elementary school. So we had to think about other options for land or building usage, and we brought everything to the table at that particular time. So as we were thinking about new ideas, we had been doing a lot of thought around this, taking the top end of students in grade 5 and looking at realignment and reconfiguration. But an idea that came up was that potentially we could also look at the lower end of the grade bands. And knowing what we know about the importance of foundational education, there was an idea that was put on the table of actually skimming from the bottom of the grade bands and considering those early learners. And so you will see, as I elaborate a little bit further on the next few slides, we have a couple options that reimagine what we might do with the Southern Cornwall Terrace site that's reimagined. It could offer a cost savings in some ways because we would not have to look at renovations as extensive to the Southern Cornwall Terrace site as we had talked about doing to Southern, and what it would take to make an equitable middle school that would be comparable to Wilson West. So we could be thinking about the options that are considered and ways we could reimagine what we currently have. So that's what we'll talk through as we go. So one of the concepts that came up was this early learning center idea. So as I said, we were talking about how to best use the existing space and the facilities we have in the district. If we were to do something like create a primary center where our KN1 students would attend, we would reduce the staffing costs that we know may be around $7+ million to staff a new elementary school, in that staff are redistributed. They would be transferred and moved on to a different site. We also know that the research indicates the benefits of this early learning foundation. And in this model, bless you, in this model, all of the resources, both capital resources and human resources, could find their way to this particular new school. And what I mean by that is, for example, federal funding could be available because all of our students would be in one place. So Title I funds could be utilized in this space, whereas not every elementary school at Wilson uses Title I funds currently because we have different variances in the level of socioeconomic population in each school. So here we're talking equity on the lowest end as well. So we're talking about, again, equitable distribution of financial and educational resources, including human resources. So we could utilize some of the elementary resources that we already have from the building. Here's an example, and again, just an example. But if we're talking about early learning, some of the time our interventions are focused, in fact, most of the time, on the primary grades so that we can intervene before they move too far into their educational career. So perhaps we could redistribute the way our reading specialists are being utilized. So we, again, are cutting staffing costs by just realizing a new location and transfer of current staffing and how we utilize them. This could be a state-of-the-art learning atmosphere. There's plenty of space. I've walked it myself, and I know there's availability of spaces that could be renovated on a phased-in as-needed basis. That affords us the opportunity to introduce additional learning options and really create something that, as I said, could be state-of-the-art. It also offers the opportunities to bring students and families together in a learning community sooner. And that's one of the items that was feedback from our families, is that we heard that students and their families wanted to see them get together and learn each other and learn each other's families much sooner. So just thinking about that environment, here's one example, and again, just a single example of a school district. This was Mansfield Independent in Texas. They did have corporate sponsorship along with input from their community and their staff. They created a mission statement around this early learning center approach. But here, because we believe in the developmental whole child approach, and we know the importance of social and emotional skills and literacy and numeracy, we can include those types of things, making them experiential, play-based, inquiry-based learning. Here's another 2 pictures that shows this student-centered environment, all of course standards-based and aligned to learning as we would expect. Again, one of the options. There was also an option put on the table about this elementary center concept. This concept is really creating one, for lack of a better term, mega elementary school. It would be utilizing Southern and Cornwall Terrace as a site, in that perhaps, and this is just a perhaps, we could call Cornwall Terrace the primary site and call Southern the intermediate site. So we would start off, of course, with 4 sections of each grade level, but then, of course, grow from there, up to as many as about 8 sections of each grade level. So we could have 8 kindergartens, 8 first grades, 8 second grades, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and so on in the building. So again, it talks about how we can best use the existing facility and space. We don't need to widen hallways because we don't pass classes in the same way that they would in a middle school environment. At full capacity now, if we had 8 sections of each, we would potentially be looking at the cost of staffing just as we would in a new elementary school environment. But we could do a possible phase-in that scenario. We would have to increase administration because we would be doubling the size of the elementary building there. And we would need more support staff, of course. But it does maintain a walkable campus. And that was something that was important to some folks as we put that out for discussion last time. And then, of course, we'd have to look at traffic flow and what we would do with transportation with that number of students in a facility. So what we're hoping to do is have you now review the options. Dr. Trickett is actually going to present those options in a chart form. You also have them in your booklet that he'll take you through, and you'll see how the early learning center and elementary center concepts come into play.
Thank you, Dr. Stout. So it may be easier for members of the board just to look at this screen. I think it presents it in an easier to understand manner. And basically what we have up here is 3 options. We have option 1A and 1B, which is what Dr. Stout just talked about. It's looking at the construction of a new middle school. Obviously, if we're using existing space for younger age children, we need to move out those secondary students somewhere else. So in option 1, both A and B, we're looking at a new site, and we're looking at a new building to house our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. Southern Middle School would no longer be located on that site. The difference between 1A and 1B is just as Stacy described. It's an early learning center concept in 1A, and it's an elementary center, as she described, in 1B. The rows, all the check boxes, the costs are consistent with data tables that the board has seen previously, and you're going to get some time to process through this as a team to talk about and think about the advantages and the disadvantages of each. But, you know, enrollment capacity is important. We have our capacity listed in here. In this particular site, if we would look at Southern combined with Cornwall Terrace, we're looking at a educational capacity, which is 100% of the functional capacity times 90.9 of 1395. So that's a large facility as it currently sits. Not looking at doing a ton of renovation to that site. Some work out front to make it look more inviting, some concrete work, some again, facade and aesthetic work, some work on the inside of the building, albeit smaller in scale, because the students in that building are smaller. We don't have to worry as much about the width of the hallways, the width of the staircases, and so forth. We're looking then to have, in this model, 4 elementary schools. And those elementary schools would be for students in their home areas in grades 2 to 5. And again, our educational capacity is listed at 540 students. Now, we do have, as you know, one elementary school over 600, but that elementary school is over capacity. So it's really not, can you fit more kids? We can fit more kids, but the recommended capacity limit is that 540. And then we would be recommending in this model to build a new middle school on a new site with capacity of 1,063 students. Going down through the project costs, you'll see all of it spelled out from left to right. These 2 options are consistent, and we did present it in a range just because we're early on in this process. We are working with our team to get those numbers as accurate as possible. We've even done academic programming to make sure that the numbers we're presenting are real numbers based on the time that this spreadsheet was completed. And then 1B, again, as described, is the larger elementary center over at that site, still looking to move forward with a new middle school concept, 6, 7, and 8 building. You see the transitions listed there. That was a concern of our community. When we reached out to our community the last time, we reached out to our teacher groups in all of our different schools. The number of transitions came up. And we talked about what is a transition? What is a physical transition? What is an emotional transition? What is a social transition? And we can talk more about that as we wrestle these ideas in shortly. Option 2 is in line with, parallel to option 1. The difference is now we're looking at grade realignment. Going back to our conversation, I believe it was from November, and looking at what would this look like if we decided to pull those 5th graders out of our elementary schools. How would that affect our capacity? How would that affect the budget? How would it affect transitions? And so forth. Busing, it's a big piece. And Randy's here today to talk through some of those pieces as well. Staffing is also a large chunk of this. Part of the reason we're here was that we were struggling with how do we build in the staffing budget to open option 5. And we have that presented to you. We have that $7.4 million down in column F compared to what we're predicting to be around, again, this is approximate, around a $1.5 million increase to staffing when one of these buildings would open. Again, we may build this up over time. If we realize another 200 kids in the next year, we're going to need more staff. It's just the way it goes. But those are our recommendations and our approximations with regard to some of the other folks we would need, social workers, counselors, custodians, principals, and so forth, that are needed to run the daily operation of the schools. So that's your option 2A and option 2B. You're going to see a larger price tag here. One of the reasons that price tag is larger is because the 5-6 building needs to be bigger. We need to plan for having, down the road, at least 550 students per grade. So we need to be planning for at least 1,100 student capacity minimum in that 5-6 center. So as your square footage increases, as does your cost, and there are some other budgetary implications to that center. So again, the difference up here is an early learning center under important considerations in option A, which is consistent with option A in column B. And then option B is the elementary center in the K-4, a larger center over on the southern Cornwall site, and then the 4 remaining home-based schools would also be K-4. Option 3 is back where we were. It's back where we were a few months ago when we came to the board with consideration of a 6th elementary school. Elementary is a concern. The growth, the capacity at elementary school needs to be addressed. So we have on here as option 3 the consideration of a new elementary school, at least 600 students, to be able to accommodate the 540 student projection. We have the costs associated with that as well. This number seems high, and the reason it is high is because we are also factoring in bringing Southern up to the standard of West Middle School. One of the equity issues that we've been tackling for the last 2 years is the physical plan, and how do we make Southern Middle School more similar to the experience that children have over at West. So that renovation project for Southern is substantial. It's very substantial in nature. Again, one thing to point out to the board is that opening this school doesn't allow us to do as much of the phasing over time. If new enrollment doesn't become realized and we open this school, we may be presented with a challenge. We may have 4 sections of each, as Dr. Stout mentioned, but we may not. There's more of a commitment from a staffing standpoint with option 5, or option 3 rather, than there is in option 1 and option 2. So again, I'm not going to go into this in-depthly. It is in your packet. I will leave this up as the board has conversation, and I'll kind of drive this spreadsheet to help our conversation. At this point, I will turn it over to Ms. Schlossman.
Thank you, Dr. Trickett. So this slide is a summary of what we had seen last month when we were talking about phase 1 of the project. And this kind of just summarizes where we're at from a debt capacity standpoint. So our consultants, RBC Capital Markets and Financial Solutions, kind of gave us a summary of where we're at, where we can be, what our capacity is. So right now we have total debt service of $72.8 million, maturing in about 7 years. Our annual debt service is $10.9 million. We have an additional borrowing capacity of $170 million. As you all know, current interest rates are low. We could borrow about 2% at the moment. New borrowing of $40 million. That debt parameters will be on the next board agenda for phase 1. That has to do with the high school campus renovation and the fields. And that adds about 4 years of debt service, maturing in 32. And we can maintain our $10.9 million of annual debt service, which is important from the fact that it's not increasing that annual debt service or affecting our millage rate for that particular budget line item. Phase 2, as you saw in that spreadsheet that Dr. Trickett just showed you, was that from option 1A to option 3 is a range of $47 million to $59.3 million of additional financing for construction costs only. And that adds about 10 years of debt to the maturities on top of the phase 1. So we'd be paying that debt off by 2042. And that would be based on maintaining our current debt service run rate of $10.9 million. And again, not affecting the millage for that particular line item. RBC's assessment is that our favorable debt rating of AA by Standard & Poor's would be maintained if we took on possibly $60 million of debt after phase 1 of $40 million. And in comparing other schools of our size, our level of debt run rate and terms are comparable to other districts. So this slide tries to summarize what we again saw on Dr. Trickett's spreadsheet of the 5 options, 1A, B, 2A, B, and 3. So the first line in orange are the construction costs that we just saw. It's the upper end of the range that was on that chart. And then additional costs are estimated in the white section factored in. We would have additional buses to acquire. We'd have additional bus drivers to drive those buses. We would also have building staffing and operating costs for those buildings. So total of phase 2 costs is the first blue bar and also the second blue bar, anywhere from $50.6 million to $63.8 million. And then the bottom section is breaking it between our capital investment and the annual recurring costs. So I'll bring your attention to this line, annual recurring costs, which is the sum of the staffing in the transportation, staffing in the building, and operating costs. So this particular line item, $2.2 million to $7.9 million, will be addressed on the next slide. So again, our options are listed at the top. So based on a current net value of a mill of $2.5 million, the annual recurring costs would require that millage of 0.88 to 3.16 to cover those annual costs when the building is opened. Now, I don't have any construction cost millage impact in here because the scenarios presented, at least tonight, would show our debt run rate would remain the same and the millage would not be affected for that particular line item. And then there's the argument, well, if you have 700 new housing projects going up in your district, you're going to have assessment increase and you won't need to raise taxes so high. Well, let's look at that. So assessment increase equivalent for that 2.2 million to the 7.9 we saw, this would be the assessment increase that we would have to realize in order to cover those annual costs, which would be translated to an assessment growth of 3.1 to 11.3%, depending on the option. Currently built into the 2021-22 budget is a 1% assessment growth, which at this point is moderate. I wouldn't say conservative or aggressive, but moderate. Seeing that we have had growth, but we've also had significant assessment challenges that have decreased the assessment in our district. So maybe a combination of some assessment growth, some tax increases could cover the at least these first 4 columns of annual operating costs. However, option 3, as we had talked about in November, is very cost prohibitive because of the level of staffing the day the doors open, which is very difficult to build into our budget. And this is just a mathematical calculation. So if we have all this housing growth in our district, what would it take? What number of properties assessed at $300,000 would it take to cover, again, this line item we're talking about, these annual recurring costs? So it would take around 300 homes assessed at $300,000 to cover annual costs in these first 4 columns, and 1,000 homes to cover the annual cost in option 3. Now, just to note, in the preliminary budget that was passed for 21-22, we have $3 million of phase-in into the budget over 5 years. starting with 600,000 and working our way up. So that would cover this particular line item. Now, when I say it's in the budget, that is index plus exception for 21-22, and then at Act 1 index for the remaining 4 years. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Fadley.
So first of all, let me thank the entire district leadership team for all of the hours that they've worked to put all of this information together. We've been meeting regularly, several hours a week, for what seems like forever. And I'm very proud of the team and the work that we've done. We've also engaged our transportation department. We've engaged some hypotheticals that in anticipation of the board discussion this evening. But really what we're looking to do at this point is talk about next steps. First and foremost, I'd like to open it up here in just a moment for board discussion, questions for clarification. We also have a responsibility to engage our community. So at the conclusion of this evening, it would be our hope that we could narrow the options down to 2 from the board to engage our community in some additional dialogue through a thought exchange, to create some analytics to bring back to the board at the May 3rd meeting so that we can share that information as to what our public is thinking about the options that the board is looking to proceed with, and at that time make an administrative recommendation to the board regarding phase 2, and then have the board, obviously at the May 3rd meeting, have conversation, dialogue, and consider the administrative recommendation moving forward so that we can do what we have done in phase 1, engage the design process moving forward. So at this point in time, I will stop talking, and we'll use please use your microphones so that the reason for that is individuals that are participating remotely, if you don't use your microphone, they'll have a very hard time hearing you and your comments regarding anything you've heard. So no question is a bad question, and if we can clarify anything that you've heard this evening so far, I know it's a lot of information, we are willing to do that at this point in time. So who wants to go first?
I'll lead off. I'm not bashful. I think it's way too much of stuff down our throats for decision on May 3rd. I want to see a budget for each one of these, a financial budget for each one of these. I guess there's 5. I don't, you folks have been working with this for months. We're getting this right tonight. I'm not pleased with this because this is the first time I saw the financial impact. You'd think the financial committee would have had a chance to look at some of this information because there may be other alternatives. This is very idealistic, and at points it's unrealistic. I mean, there's so much stuff here thrown at us one night, and you want a decision tonight which way to go? Several months ago we had people were having a bird because we could add an addition to the elementary schools, but that center would exceed 700 people, but yet we have a projection up here where this one center would have over 1,100 people. We got apples and oranges again. I don't want, like I said, the presentation's great, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot here. And to go through all this, first the projections, Chris, I hate to differ with you, but the projections even showed how they're off already. They're already off 200 students per the original projections. There's no way these projections are correct. Richard, you're going to send me the enrollments from 2000 to the current, fact, don't hold me to this, because I had a folder and all this information, and it kind of disappeared. But after 2000 and 2008, there was talk that, we're going to be overwhelmed with all these new projects, all the 1,000 new homes coming online. Guess what? The next 4 years, we had over less than 200 people, new students. So I need those projections. We have a lot of information here that I can't tonight say, well, I don't know which way to go. I like some of the presentations, but I don't know. We have people here in education. I like to sit down and understand this better. I think it's a step in the right direction, but how can I recommend something when I don't know the financial impact of each one of these particular projects? So I don't want things rammed down my throat. I don't care what other board members have to say or do, but there's way too much here for me to make a decision. That's it.
So, Mr. Martin, thank you for your comments. I would add a couple of things. First and foremost, the calculations in terms of student enrollment are actual numbers. So the first chart you saw was an actual student number count, which I think we could all agree that our district is continuing to grow. The second chart you saw was an analysis that was done by a tool that we currently use for multi-functions in our school district, and that tool is called Forecast 5. That tool is very heavily used in our financial analysis as a school district in terms of how we do our projections from a financial standpoint. And the third tool that you saw with the enrollment projections was Decision Insight, and their conservative projections and their moderate projections. And we're not saying that the moderate projection is the correct projection. We're not saying the conservative projections are the correct projections. We're saying that our recommendation would be to use what we call a line of best fit. So that's first and foremost to the first part of your question. Second, we did work with the architect, Crabtree Rohrbach, much like we did with the analysis of the high school renovation project, to come up with some very informed numbers on these different options, option 1A, option 1B, 2A, 2B, and option 3. So these numbers are inclusive of that analysis in depth. We've had multiple meetings with the architects, much like we did again with the high school renovation project, and are very comfortable with those ranges of numbers. In reference to being a lot of information, I would agree with you. There is a lot of information here. However, the goal of tonight is not to make a decision on what to do. The goal of tonight is to have the board give us some input, because we cannot continue to run scenarios on 5 different options moving forward. It is extremely time intensive, and occupies not only the CFO, but myself and the rest of the district's staff's time. We need to have some direction from the board as to programmatically what is it that the board might want to see us go out and gather some additional information from our community to see where our community stands on this particular project, or phase number 2. Much like we did with the high school, we learned from the first phase, we learned from our community that our community placed a high priority on safety and connecting the building, the lower house and the upper house. So you see in the end result, you see in that phase 1 design, you see that incorporated based on our community's value of that safety into that project. You saw a very heavy focus in phase one from the community saying it's time for us to address the needs of the auditorium and the performing arts. You'll see in phase one that that's exactly what we brought forward. So from the standpoint of moving forward, it's not to make a final decision, it's just to gather more information so that we can begin the design process with Crabtree in the near future, so that we can come back to the board with all of the information that you're talking about and button it up in a nice package like we did with phase one, so that you have all of the information and the ability to ask all of those questions from the design process through the completion process, and whenever the board's ready to make a decision on whether or not they want to proceed or not proceed. The bottom line is this: the kids are coming, the building is happening all around us, our district is growing, and we need to, in my recommendation would be, we need to decide what our plan is moving forward, because the kids are going to come, and we're going to need to have a place for the kids to be. And that's my concern, is that we have that direction so that we can begin that planning. So whether it's 3 or 4 years out, when we're complete with these projects, that we're ready for the onslaught that is going to happen in the Wilson School District. Our district will continue to grow because of the programming and the educational, strengths that the Wilson School District has. This is a destination place for people to live, to raise their families, and they want their kids educated here. So that's the goal of tonight. And
right,
the goal is always to answer board member questions.
I understand what you're saying. Just as a point of reference, there's almost 1,000 students difference between forecast 5 and the moderate forecast. So there's 1,000 students difference there, okay? And you always talk about the community. I have no idea who the community is. We don't care about the seniors, obviously, because taxes are going to go up 25, 30% over 5 years. Don't they have a say? We're very narrow focused just on education. There's other components to education. There's livelihood of our community. And all I hear is, the community. Well, let's get the results. Let me get the 20-year enrollment figures, can show you that this information is very, very inaccurate. And if I had that information, I asked you for it, and if I had that information, I could show you the growth from 20 to 20. There's no, and just like I said, after 2000, we're going to be influx, the kids are going to be, intense outside. That never occurred. So,
I mean, to be fair, they kind of are intense outside of Whitfield.
well, Amy, it's because...
I mean, really.
You're in education. I get your point, and I respect your point, okay? It all comes down to class size. You feel class size, I feel class size 24 is fine. You have a different opinion on that. There's ways we never looked at adding an addition to the existing buildings. That was something I suggested. We never looked at that because educators didn't want that. But, other people may have wanted that to cut the costs down, to be realistic. But we want to build an early child center holds 1,200. Well, come on, let's be fair about this. We can't have an elementary school with 700. But
Just to interject, Mr. Martin, part of the goal of this administration has been to utilize the buildings that we do own. So we own Southern and we own Cornwall Terrace. That's real estate we already have. So we're not asking to build a new school there. We're asking to utilize that space in a different manner so that our costs are controlled long term. But it also creates an environment, regardless of whether you support a larger school or not, it creates an opportunity for us to grow over time without having to construct new space. Whether it's constructing new space at an additional school or not, it still costs money to construct new space. So, one of the things that we took a hard look at, and Dr. Trickett will have more of the precise numbers on this, but we were having a conversation dating back to, I believe it was 2015-16, to present day. And I don't want to misspeak, Dr. Trickett, but if you rewind the clock to 2015-16, in the Wilson School District, we have 500 more students than we did in 2015. Is that correct?
I think the average is about 80 students per year. So depending on how many years that encompasses.
If I would have had that schedule like I asked, you wouldn't be guessing. We have it in front
So
of us.
the facts are that every year, the Wilson School District increases at least 80 students.
I don't know that as a fact.
That's the facts. I'm
Well,
telling
show
you,
me
that's
that.
the actual numbers.
Then why don't I have that in front of me that I can see from 2000 to current? You're telling me stuff I asked for. Where is it? It's a fact. It should be in front of me, shouldn't it?
And we can provide that
Well, it
information.
should have been provided tonight because I asked for it.
So,
Dr. Bailey, if I may, just, and again, I think enrollment is certainly a big factor in any decision. I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about educational philosophies. I think the idea of an early learning center for K through 1 is unique to this area and certainly unique to the district. And I think for the board to make some decisions on that particular model would need to hear some more information from administration on the benefits of such a decision. But secondly, I think it's important to get feedback from the community on that particular decision. You're talking about one location of those very, very young, I like the term kiddos that Dr. Trickett always used, young kiddos coming from all different parts of the district that can be either a long bus ride, an early morning, could be a challenge for parents that choose to bring their kids to school. So that's a new way of grasping the way Wilson would deliver education to me, since I'm not in that position any longer of having children of that age, that I would want as a board member to have that particular feedback from parents and hear the benefits from an educational standpoint. And then secondly, the idea of a 5-6 building as opposed to a new middle school certainly is another new concept to the district that we have not had. And to hear some feedback from parents, again, with the idea of one centrally located 5-6 building, hopefully centrally located, as again, that's a conversation that will be ongoing in terms of where new construction would take place for a 5-6 building or a new middle school or a new 7-8. How that may impact, families and the disruption of certain communities that we have currently that may look a little bit differently should we decide to go in that direction. My personal opinion is, option 3, which looks the most similar to what we already have, appears to be the most cost prohibitive moving forward. I think the idea of the annual recurring cost of $7.9 million, knowing the difficulties of even coming to that in a number of years with rolling that into the budget would be almost impossible. I'm not saying anything is impossible, but would be very, very challenging to the taxpayer moving forward. So for me, whether we decide to go with a 1A, 2A option really requires more information from administration of why that concept educationally would be a benefit to what we currently have. And then secondly, from parents, the idea of what that type of impact would have upon them and how that may impact people viewing Wilson as a destination district. What we have currently seems to be a magnet for people within the county and people moving into the area. An abrupt change like that may sway people from making that move. So I would like to learn more about that from both an administrative and a parental feedback. And then secondly, as I said, which I think is a topic of conversation for a little bit later, is where we might be looking to do new construction and how that decision should either be a new middle school versus some type of 5-6 center. So,
Right. Thank you,
those are my
Mr.
comments.
Negrini, for those comments. And if you look at the bullet number 3 on next steps, that's exactly, at least part of your question was, how are we going to engage parents and the community on what they value in terms of, whether there is support for a change in the paradigm or not, it would be a change in the paradigm. Option 1A certainly is a different concept, whereas option 1B is very similar to what we currently do. So the hope is whatever the board decides to gather more information on, we would do exactly that. In reference to your comments and your questions regarding the research behind the early learning K-1 model, we do have that research, and we've done that analysis. And Dr. Stout, being the early learning expert, can speak more to what that is. We can do that now. We can provide that at a future time. Perhaps you can give a summary of the benefits of the K-1 model versus the current structure that we have now.
Well, actually, what I wanted to hopefully address, and we can definitely talk about the benefits, and that will be something that we can do, but Mr. Martin raised the question about how did we get to a space where we're talking about almost 1,000 students. And it really is something that is based on the research, the developmental research of the psychology of a child. So the students that are in that age group, if we're talking about kindergarten and first grade, and even perhaps potentially down the road, inclusive of preschool if we wanted to go that direction, and then we'd have availability of another building in Berkshire Heights to use for whatever purposes, but neither here nor there. At this current time, we're talking K and 1. The child psychology behind that is that those students are in a very egotistical frame of mind. And so if you know something about young children, you know that their classroom is their school. So this is their school. So what you are able to do is you're able to take students and put them together in individual little classrooms and create sort of like schools within the school. So we could put together 4 sections of kindergarten and still call that sort of like Team A or a red team or whatever you wanted to call it. But it doesn't become apparent to a child until they get into that pre-operational stage, according to Piaget, that they start to notice and find importance in community. So that's where we're talking about children age 8 through about 11, where the sense of being in a community environment becomes more important to them. And so there is developmental research behind some of that thinking in either an early learning center environment or in the elementary environment, where we could put a primary concentration and an intermediate concentration. So there are more things that we can talk about, but getting into the benefits, I did talk a little bit about financial resources, human resources, so that we're talking about a more equitable distribution of, let's say, Title I funds from the federal level. We could secure funding at the state level for early education initiatives, inclusive of kindergarten and first grade and so on. So there are some benefits to that kind of model that we can definitely talk longer about.
So on K and K1, I guess here's my, they're normally 5 and 6-year-olds.
Yes,
Well, I guess they should be. So they go from that large center then to the individual school.
Correct.
Starting in 2nd grade.
right.
And I just have a problem with understanding that you're going from a large school, now you're going to a
Sure.
smaller school,
Sure.
and everything's okay.
The-
Whereas we can't, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, the benefits are a little bit different in that the benefit is, of course, for the child in an early learning environment when you have the resources that we talked about, when you have reading specialists, interventionists, so on and so forth, concentrated into one environment, when you have speech and language teachers able to actually intervene, do those things to have students increase their preparedness for further down the line in their education. We can do that in a school within a school type of model. When they get then back to their home school, if this board would decide that we want to then put them in those 4 home schools for 2nd through 5th grade or whatever that looks like, 2nd through 4th grade, that's where I was talking about students become more oriented toward noticing their peers and wanting to be a member of the community. Then when we start to talk about middle school, there's separate psychology to middle school kids, of course, that social pressure, the adolescence sets in, and then we have different priorities, which actually intensify the need for bringing them together sooner. So sometimes we base it on the resources, sometimes we base it on the child psychology, but there are multiple levels and layers to why those recommendations came to fruition.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would echo a lot of what Mr. Negrini said. I think he said it very well. I think it might be possibly a little easier tonight or sooner rather than later to possibly eliminate one option as opposed to choose, these are the 2 we want to move forward with. That being said, I think it'd be interesting to see summarized what we view as the outcomes or advantages of the pre-K model or the pre-K through 1 model versus the K through 5 model, advantages and disadvantages, and same thing with the 5, 6, 7, 8 versus the 6, 7, 8, because I'm not clear at this point what we feel is the best educationally. And I realize that there's always going to be pluses and minuses on both sides,
Yeah, right.
but I think we need to start to summarize that visually because I can't see it right now. And without that, to your point, I don't feel comfortable moving forward until I see more of those outcomes outlined in terms of what are the positives and
And
negatives.
we do have those. I mean, we've been discussing them for quite some time.
Yeah,
So
but I would like to see that
absolutely,
breakdown
bring
about
them.
this is 5, 6, 7 and 8, this is 6, 7, 8, and then again, this is whatever, pre-K. So but again, in option A, it does say pre-K, so
Right.
the intention is to move, quote, what's at Berkshire Heights right now to this elementary.
No, the intention is to create the option of an early learning center, and if at some point we want to phase in the pre-K environment, we can. So that was
Okay.
just what's potential, not what we need to do. We're
Okay,
talking
so the
about
pre-K
K and
listed
one.
on whatever slide this, I don't know what slide
But
this
yes,
is.
pre-K, we felt that it was important to be inclusive of the pre-K environment because it is an option that we've discussed as being the important parts of the foundational education for kids is the pre-K. But that wouldn't have to be something we do at this time. If the board prefers to keep Berkshire Heights running as the early learning center, then we do that over at Berkshire Heights and we keep our pre-K there. But we felt that it was important to be inclusive of them because then you'd have 3 grade levels, really, and we do have room to do that.
But having
So-
the pre-K option would help address the equity issue in the district.
Correct.
More long-term.
Right,
So it might be a benefit down the line to have that.
correct.
But if you're going to turn Cornwall Terrace and Southern into one school for whether it's K through first or pre-K, it makes no financial sense to keep Berkshire Heights open at all.
Right.
Because you're going to have that additional
Absolutely.
space.
Absolutely. So if we did go with the option of bringing pre-K into the Cornwall Terrace Southern site, we would not need Berkshire Heights.
So
Correct.
is that baked in behind the scenes? I mean, it's, I would imagine it is, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
But that still won't eliminate that parents have the option of putting their kids in another pre-K.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
That's just, it would be, if this is what the board would like to do, it would be simply lifting up the program and relocating it to a different space as it exists. Now, down the line, if we decide to create further evolution or do something further with it, we have those options, but there was no intention to change the program as it exists, but just simply lift it up and move it if that's something that we felt was relevant to do.
But wouldn't that give you more options then if you do pick it up and move it in terms of, busing options and so forth like that, or not? Am I incorrect on that?
Yes, if the board decides that we would make pre-K part of the requirement as the view of Wilson School District. Are we a pre-K through 12 school, or are we a K through 12 school? So we wouldn't necessarily have to offer busing. For example, now at Berkshire Heights, we do not offer busing. So we could decide, do we want to make it a pre-K-12 program at Wilson, or do we want to maintain what we have and run the preschool as a business and so on?
Sure, because again, I think that, because that would have some effect at some point on the operational costs and so forth like that too.
Yes.
Yeah. At that point, would it then be, since it's a pre-K, would it be open to, as Berkshire Heights is now, open to residents outside of the Wilson School District?
Berkshire Heights now is not open to residents outside the district. That was changed about a year ago, where it is Wilson residents only.
I mean, there's, the pre-K, there's issues with that. I mean, I think that's almost a side conversation.
Yes.
To be honest with you, because.
Yes, it is.
It really, I mean, I understand what you're saying, get rid of Berkshire Heights, get that part, I understand that. But the pre-K, there's pros and cons to that, and we really need to analyze the pros and cons of the pre-K.
Yep, I'm happy to talk about those at some point.
And I'd be happy to discuss for hours with you.
Okay.
So one of the other things that, maybe to bring us back into focus, that we also as a board need to consider is, obviously we don't have unlimited resources. And some of what we may decide to do will have a financial emphasis of, can we afford to do the option 2B or 2A that we presented? Because if you look at the difference between option 1A and 1B and option 2A and 2B, it's about $15 million. And part of when we started talking about the feasibility study, we talked about spending within our means and not pushing debt out for long, long periods of time. So what we've tried to do is show that the different columns showing, the 5, 6, 7, 8, and I can tell you based on some of the data we collected early on, the kids love the concept of coming together as 5th and 6th graders across the district. Now the parents, they weren't so keen on that idea, but the kids, that's what the kids wanted. So I think we also have to be careful that, what we could do and what we can do might be two different things in terms of what we're willing to expend over time, because remember, we're already moving forward with $40 million worth of expense. And so the administration has tried to capture those dollar figures and those programmatic educational environments in a way that shows you, yes, it can be done, here's the cost to do it. Those numbers are pretty solid. If you choose to do a K1 versus a K5 or a K1 versus a K4 model, those are all choices. And we can bring whatever information back to the board, but the piece that we don't know at this point in time is where our community stands, and that's the bullet number 3 I keep referring back to on that paradigm shift with the K1 school. Because that's a whole different model than what Wilson is used to. Now, if we go out and we survey our community, we can bring that information back to the board, and the board will know exactly where our community stands from the analytics that we put together on that particular question. And that may influence some of the board members' decisions as to what they would like to see moving forward with phase 2.
Dr. Fadley, if I may, I think one of the things that would be beneficial to the board and the community would be to see, I'm sure obviously other districts have gone to this model. If we could see what some of the impact has been, in terms of later special ed needs as they move through, as we've seen drops in both needs and costs. I think those types of real world data points would be very helpful to both the board and the community to see what kind of an impact that model would have.
And Dr. Stout, at my request, is already put much of that information together. That's stuff that we've been putting together for quite a while, Dr. Stout, in terms of the educational and financial benefits of early learning education, in terms of what the expense will be down the road, whether it be remedial or special ed or special reading programs, or whatever the case might be.
Dr. Faley, I also think if we could have the input from our staff as well as the teachers in the buildings. I kind of heard that option 3 was something that was favored by the staff. I don't know. I realize it's expensive and it doesn't seem sustainable. But before eliminating any options, I'm just wondering, what the benefits are, what our staff saw as beneficial, other than obviously we need a new elementary school.
So you're speaking to option 3?
Option 3, yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about building a new elementary school.
Yeah.
One of the downsides to that is our ability to support the staffing implications that will create at approximately $7.8 million, $7.6 million. Those additional costs would come at the expense of the general fund budget. We currently do not have a budget built to sustain or even get to $7.6 or $7.8 million over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. So what that would mean in terms of option 3 would be the taxpayers burdening the taxpayers with additional millage, not only to the Act 1 index plus exceptions for this coming year, but for every year for the next 5 years. And we didn't feel, based on the fact that wouldn't solve the long-term enrollment issues within the district, we didn't, as an administration, feel that was a viable option for the board to look at, although we did include it because that was the initial approach. But it would tax, for lack of a better word, our taxpayers for the foreseeable future at the limit. And that's not something that I can support, especially when we have existing space in buildings that we already own that we could repurpose and reutilize and do a bit of district redistricting to balance the size and where our kids go moving forward.
I just want to add something. Right now, we're hard pressed just to do these, because right now, without a new elementary school, over the next 5 years, taxes are going to go up 22%. We are going to price ourselves, we like ourselves, our district is a place to come. If we're not careful, we're going to price ourselves out of people coming to our district. We're not going to come just for education, because if we add a new school, we're talking between 30 and 35% increase in 5 years. I'm not sure that would fly. And that's the point I'm trying to get back to, is if we're going out to the community, we have to do a financial statement showing, not a financial statement, I'm sorry, each one of the options, the millage increase over 5 years. I'm pretty confident I know the millage on some of them. I don't know them on all, so I don't want to go out and just say, because, it becomes, is it a want or a need? Well, when it comes to parents, it's going to be a want. And every parent, rightfully so, wants their son or daughter to have the best of everything. I get that. But we have to also go out and be realistic to everybody in the community, including the taxpayers, the elderly, saying, right now, under this scenario, whatever, I'm just picking out one, 2A. Don't know which one that was anymore, but okay, this is going to be the increase over 5 years. We need to provide that to the community. Because that's a very important part of any decision making. Because I'd like to have a Mercedes-Benz. Well, can't afford it, but I would like it if someone would give it to me. So I just want to make sure that when we tell the whole story, because we're only telling part story about education, which is obviously our job, but we also have to be fair to all the stakeholders, not just selected ones. So I think it's very important to show the taxpayers under their options what it's going to be. And then they can blend the two and make an informed decision.
And just to add on to that, Mr. Martin, the other thing that obviously is establishing, the future of the district in good financial stead. But we've talked about this in terms of making sure that we are not adding on certain costs, but then we are losing certain programs. And I think that's an additional factor that should go into, Ms. Casper, what you were talking about is, sure, we might be able to do certain things, but eventually we may be losing some of the great programs that we currently have that other districts don't, for the sake of, we are able to build and add on to option number 3, but what programs are we losing out on? That we are, one of the few that hold on to a robust music program that some of our neighboring districts no longer have. The other part to the equation is, we have a board of 9 currently. This is an election year, and we may be looking at a completely different board makeup, in 2.5 years. But we don't want to find ourselves in a position where there's a commitment to this humongous tax increase that may not be embraced by some new members in a couple of years, and then there are programs on the chopping block because of that. So it is a fine balance with addressing our needs and our wants, and that's just another thing that we need to take into consideration with our decision.
So I want to start out by reminding everyone that we did not raise taxes last school year, and that does have a compounding effect, and that is part of the reason that this new school is less affordable than it was last year at this time. And I'd also like to remind everybody that the predicament that we are in is because the district, over the past 10 or 15 years, has chosen to patchwork our elementary schools and to add on elementary schools, rather than doing what they should have done when they closed Lincoln Park and West Wyah, which is build a new school. The new school has been needed for far beyond my term as a school board member. I also want to say that equity is not just a school building. Equity is also the opportunity, and it's also the makeup of the school. It's being able to go to school in your neighborhood. I get really nervous, and sorry this is patchwork because this is on notes. I get really nervous when you use the word phased in. Like, we're not going to do this now, we're going to phase it in later. And I might have PTSD from past phasing in projects, but a lot of times this school says they're going to phase things in and then they never happen. And that happened when I was a teacher in this district. I do think that one of the checklists, I was disappointed to see that, I don't know which one it was, that one of them didn't check if you kept Southern and remodeled it. It said there would be no equity and no extra co-curriculars, which I find to be the complete and total opposite. I think that the district constantly underestimates the need to have walkability for that neighborhood and for those schools, because even the kiddos in Lincoln Park can walk technically to Southern in the Cornwall Terrace complex. And I can tell you, having a ninth grader who practices at the senior high, and we live all the way out in Lower Heidelberg, how hard it is, and I have a really flexible job, to get my kid back and forth to practice this year, to pick him up. And I just want to tell Mr. Martin, 3 baseball games, ask me how many were rained out. That it's really hard
And I have a really flexible job. My husband owns his business. He has a flexible job. And we are struggling to get our kid where he needs to go. And that's just one. I have 2 more coming down the pipe. So I am very, you're going to have to do some hard selling to me to take away that walkability from those Southern Cornwall Terrace families. That also goes along with siblings, be able to pick up siblings, provide childcare after school. I'm not at this point willing to give that up for our students and our families, especially over at the southern side. While I would quit this board and my job at Kutztown to work at the pre-K1 building, because it would be the happiest place on the planet Earth. Like, it would be so much fun. I have to pause and think about that. I'm going to disagree a little bit with Dr. Stout. I have a 7-year-old. I have a first grader. And she left Berkshire Heights with her bestie, and it was fine, and she didn't cry, and she was excited to go to school with her brothers. And I think that's another thing we underestimate, is the ability for siblings to go to school together. I had siblings. My oldest was not able to go to school with his younger brothers and sisters, and it was devastating. It was not fair to my kids to not be able to see what it was like for their older brother to go to school. And I can tell you, if you had to uproot Blakely right now and take her away from her class in her school, it would be devastating. And I attended the focus group with Miss Casper, and the only students that spoke out adamantly that they wanted a 5, 6, 7, 8 building were the students from Spring Ridge who have to get split up because part of Spring Ridge goes to Southern and part of Spring Ridge goes to West. And those kids were legitimately, I wanted to hug them because they were absolutely psychologically damaged. The 3 of them that spoke out was appalling to me. Like, I'm so mortified for those poor kids. I don't want to do that to 7-year-olds. Cross-grade learning. One of the best things I did as a teacher was have my first graders read to the 5th graders, 5th graders read to the 6th graders. It builds community, it builds literacy skills, it builds relationships. They get to see them when they go to lacrosse practice, or they go, you know, they see them around town and they're like, oh, you're my book buddy, and they get all excited. That's part of community building, and that goes far beyond just one school year. One thing that I have a wondering about is I don't understand why is so much more money to staff a new school, but technically in the elementary center option, you're having 2 schools. So you're going to need 2 principals. You're going to need 2 guidance counselors, 2 sets of teachers. Why is that so much less expensive than building a new school? Because you're going to need the same amount of teachers. You need guidance counselors. You're going to need nurses. And I do agree with Mr. Martin. We were fed that you told us adamantly in our guiding principles that 700 was too big for an elementary school. So that is has to be a big switcheroo in your brain when you spent since last January telling us that 700 was too big for an elementary school. Oh, busing. Let me put my mom pants on here for a second. Next year, I have 4 different bus times for 4 different kids. I do not wish that on my worst enemy. And by doing a pre-KK1 building, you're making, and God forbid if you do a pre-KK1, then you do 2 through 4, then you do a 5, 6, then you do 7, 8. It's like bus time whiplash. Like, that is, like, I'm already terrified. And I would not want to do that to another family. I think I got everything else. Yep, I think that's all.
Any other?
Dr. Faley or Mr. Hart, it's Mrs. Cocker. I'm joining remotely. I don't know, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of tack on some comments to Dr. Kennedy's. I think that in my looking at the different options, I did kind of like a pros and cons list. And I think that the points that Dr. Kennedy made about busing and different start times and splitting up siblings were all on my cons list, because I think those are a huge deviation from what we have now. And that's kind of what the the kindergarten, first grade building and the 5, 6, 7, 8 buildings, that's the biggest problem. Is it's a huge change and it's a huge shift from what we have been accustomed to. And I think Mr. Negrini also commented on that as a community, we would have to really kind of weigh if the pros to those different situations, the different structures, are enough to outweigh the cons. So if we have 2 middle schools and the new building is a middle school, my thinking is, especially depending on the location, that we would probably deal with some redistricting, some shifting of our current boundaries, which could help or hinder the walkability, like Dr. Kennedy said. It may provide walkability to a different group of students, while probably taking away the walkability for the community around the current southern building. So if you're looking at bringing students together and having, rather than students wait until they're in 9th grade to actually build a Wilson community together and shifting it down to 5th grade, which I do think would be a huge benefit socially. I understand that a physical transition and an emotional transition to new buildings, I think that would probably be close to 5 transitions, is definitely something we need to take a look at. But it wouldn't be a social transition, because those students would still be together. So they start together in 5th grade and they stay together the whole time. So socially, they would be more familiar with each other, and there wouldn't be the clear split of them versus us, because they'd be one group. So I see a big positive there. Also, the pre-K, first grade building, my list of pros are definitely more than my list of cons. But that's something as a community we would have to decide if that's something we want to venture into. I know moving forward, definitely in Pennsylvania, and hopefully at least on the East Coast. I don't know about countrywide, nationwide, but we're most likely moving towards a universal pre-K concept. And I think if we get ahead of that and already have the structure in place in our district, I think that's a huge benefit. We could also include pre-K moving forward, years down the line, 5 years down the line, in our elementary buildings, if we provide the capacity to do that by building the 5, 6, 7, 8, the 2 buildings for those grades, because you'd be removing 5th grade from the elementary schools. So replacing that with, pre-K classes, if that's the direction that we go, I think that would be an easy transition. I do want to point out that if we're talking about the Southern Cornwall Terrace building, and we're concerned about having over 1,000 students in that building versus the 700, I look at the Cornwall Terrace Southern building, if it is to be an elementary center as opposed to early learning. As an elementary center, it's actually more like 2 school buildings. So we would have our early years, our primary years in the Cornwall Terrace section. And then the southern section would be the 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, depending how we do our split. Yes, it would require more staffing, but it wouldn't, and I know, Dr. Kennedy, that you said this isn't a good phrase that you care for, but it wouldn't be all at once like the new building would be. If we did option 3, it would be a new building. Right off the bat, it would have to be staffed fully, and we don't have any of those employees right now. So the Cornwall Terrace Southern building, we would start with staff that we currently have, and based on our needs of population, we would fill in the empty classrooms that we need to fill with students, with staff. And maybe one year we need to put 10 teachers in off the bat. That's a lot less than staffing a full elementary school. So I think for cost, option 3 is cost prohibitive for those reasons. If we're going to kind of narrow it down, I think that what we're really looking at is if we're going to have 2 middle schools versus 5, 6, 7, 8, or if we're going, and then also with both of those options, if we're taking the Southern Cornwall Terrace building, and are we going to make it, a large elementary school split into 2 grade levels, 2 sections, or are we going to have it a pre-K to first grade building. So I think those are the two options. You know, you have two options for both levels, and I think educationally, I think that the pre-K first building and the 5, 6, 7, 8 make the most sense socially and educationally, but I obviously see the pros and cons, and the cons of the change that would require for our district and our community. I see that the 6, 8, the two middle schools and just making a larger elementary school are more comfortable, and that's what we've kind of been doing for the last 50 years, so it feels like that. I don't know how the community feels, but I feel like that's a safer way to go, and cost-wise, it's actually cheaper. So that's just my pros and cons that I've been weighing when looking at the 4 different options.
Any other comments?
Sure, why not? Just a couple of things. Last year, I guess November, the time frame that we had the little round tables out here, we had a bit of a, presentation, and then we had about 15 minutes to speak. I just want to make it clear for the record in public, I was a big proponent for 5, 6, 7, 8 last time we sat here, and there are a couple of reasons, and I have been educated by many educational leaders, community members, that we are at times trying to fix a problem, an equity problem that does not necessarily need to be fixed. And it's a disservice to our community to say whether we all have to be through one building or not. We have a problem that we need to fix a building called Southern up to standards equal to the rest of our buildings in this district. There are people that specifically move into neighborhoods and areas in our district, so they are close to family, so they are close to walking their younger sisters or brothers home from school, that we start jockeying people all around this district. I'm not sure the community's going to have an appetite for that. I mean, if this is an option between options 2A, 2B with this 5, 6, 7, 8 versus the 1A, 1B, I think the 1A and 1B is much less of an impact to our district, only because I think when you start getting into the middle school stuff, where you have extracurricular stuff, sports items, to have 2 different teams or 2 different plays and 2 different sets of students and doing different things outside of school, that's where all the travel time as a parent comes in. At the elementary level, it's not as bad. So I am open and warmed up to this 1A concept. To Dr. Kennedy's point, there was a lot of discussion that needed to be fixed with the whole Spring Ridge separation. So if there is any kind of and I'm sure you all have talked about this, but if there's some way that you can make, if we would go this direction, elementary classes based on where you're going to head next, so you're not breaking up friendships that people are making within those classrooms, I think that might be palatable. But I think the community would probably have much more of an appetite for 2 years busing their own kids. And let's face it, not many people take buses in our district. Yeah, and there's most people, you see the lines of cars, everyone gets dropped off, or many people do. I think that the public would have a much better appetite for doing that for 2 years in kindergarten and first grade, rather than doing it with 5, 6, 7, 8. So I would like to propose that we take options to make things easier on the administration to try and pick something. Let's take 2A and 2B right off the table. I think this is a matter of, do we build a new elementary school, or do we go like a 1A? I don't think the public's going to have an appetite for, busing their kids or commuting their kids for 5 years, K through 5. I appreciate the option, but and again, I'm sure there's going to be some public discussions with regard to that. Yeah, do you want to interrupt for a moment? Go ahead.
No, I just want to make sure you complete your thought before I start talking.
I'm still thinking. Go ahead.
So may I make, Mr. Hart, may I make a recommendation? Dr. Trickett, Dr. Stout, do we have some sort of technology solution to have the board tell us what they like? Do we have what is that technology device called?
Inventimeter.
how can we do this without more information? I mean, I'm not,
Well, all I'm asking for is you to give us your top two choices. I'm not asking you to make a decision on what we do, but we do need to get some sort of direction so we can put more information together.
To Mike's point, though, what I would like to see are the options, instead of turning Southern into an elementary center, what would happen if we turn Cornwall Terrace and Southern into a larger, more updated Southern, and then maybe built a learning center? It's basically the opposite, but have you explored that? And, well, the staffing would probably be the same, I would imagine, to your 1A, 1B.
That's option 3.
Is that an option 3?
Yeah.
Is there any way we could, like, revamp option 3? I don't want to see our administration have to go back to the drawing board and do all the financial, but is there any way we could save money with the option 3 still? Or rearrange it somehow?
The board speak to that. Hearing the board speak is, I'm hearing from everyone in one way, shape, or form that we need to hear more information from the community, from the staff members. I appreciate all the work that the administration and the team has done to get us to this point. It's already taken options off the table, but, and I appreciate wanting to come up with 2 recommendations tonight of the top 2, but I don't know that as a board or even as a community, without hearing from everybody, we can do that yet. I would love to do that to move us forward because we have been walking down this trail for several years, but let's take another week or 2 and hear from the community. Craft some questions that are going to get us to 1A, B, 2A, B, and 3, or even a 4 or 5, based on what your questions are. And again, I don't want to halt or the progress, but I'm hearing, if you're hearing differently, board members, please let me know, but I do think it sounds like we need a little bit more information on philosophy for K1, 2, pre-K, as well as 5, 6, 7, 8, or something to that effect.
So I do hear that. So I want to make sure that we all understand, if we're going to go out to the community and say these are the options that exist, there are currently 5 options that the board has in front of them, and we've put those options together at the request of the board just to see the various different avenues available. So I just want to be clear that if we go out and survey the community and the community comes back and overwhelmingly says, we want this option versus this option, that
Dr. Bailey, I don't
there are cost implications to those particular options that the board then would have to decide how they want to address
not to interrupt, but
the dollars associated with that, because currently option 3 is undoable in our current budget structure. So that would mean, let's just say option 3 is the chosen option and the favorite option in the community. That would mean that we all need to understand that we're committing the district to tax increases to the index plus the exceptions for the next 5 years.
Dr. Bailey, my understanding of it, and board members speak if you feel it differently, I don't think we're at the point to offer 5 options to the community. I think we need to hear philosophies and thoughts about size of a building versus pre-K 1 and 2. I don't think we go out, if that supersedes what the board's even thinking at this point. We need to hear what community members are saying before we say, as a community, vote on 1A, 1B, 2A, 2C, or 3. I don't think we're at that point. We can't make a decision at this point as a board member now, as much as you would like us to, and as much as I had hoped we would be able to. But I think before we take it to the community to make a decision, we need to do that before the board can decide option 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5.
I just want to, I kind of want to piggyback on that. I don't know the benefits of the K to 1. I like to hear the benefits of the 5, 7, 7, 8, because I don't know what to do. I mean, once again, I'm not saying this to the people that want the new elementary school. It's not feasible. You just can't do it. I mean, there's just no way we could afford a 35% taxpayer increase over 5 years.
Wait, I have a question. You were on the board when we built West, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so is that not how we were presented that the West, the money to make West go happened, right? We were told, when we met in those little tables that Mr. Case was talking about, that when West came to be, that there was a period that you raised taxes until you could pay for West.
Let me answer that question. Yes.
So you're willing to invest in middle schools. This is the school, I need to hear this from the district, that the district is willing to invest in middle schools, but you are not willing to invest in a new elementary school. And what Mr. Case said is the problem that brought us all this here is that we have no room in our elementary schools.
Okay.
That's the problem we have.
Okay.
Number one.
All right, so I can answer, hopefully I can answer your question. Okay, when we were building Middle West School, I don't know if anybody's on this board, but that middle school was going to be almost 1.5 times its size, based on whatever reason. It doesn't worry about it. So several of us campaigned, say that school needs to be cut down because if we built that school, we couldn't afford it. So we went back. We didn't raise taxes to the max. We raised taxes always to cover that debt. It's easy. The problem is it's not building. I mean, the building itself, the physical building and construction isn't what is cost prohibitive.
I understand that.
We were taking existing teachers and putting them in
But you also brought in from half-day to full-day kindergarten, and there was additional staffing that was
but
brought to us.
okay, but that had nothing to do with that particular construction.
Oh, it did. Correct.
Well, the increase of half made it more practical to do that, but we still didn't, we cut back on that building. The bulk of the cost was not with kindergarten, okay? Because we had half teachers. Well, not half, you know what I mean. We had teachers already there. So the cost, the burden of the cost wasn't the building or the teachers itself. And we raised taxes to what was reasonable to be expected, and when that production was done, it was over. This, what we're planning here, is forever. If you look at, I don't have the millage thing here, but if you look at the millage, after the building was constructed, it went back to normal, okay? In this scenario, when I say back to normal, the increases went back to normal. And we can get this for the next time we meet, Christine can put this all, can put this all together. But I'm not concerned about the construction. Well, I am concerned about this part of the construction because it does increase the debt and pushes out to 2040. So you're right to a degree, but the bulk of that was not the relays of building that building.
So if I could interject, I want to go back to a point that Mr. Negrini made. And administration exists at the will of the board, at the direction of the board, to move forward with the board consensus on whatever that consensus is. But the board hires administration to make recommendations and to make sure that whatever is put out there for ultimate consideration, you understand all of the impacts of the different options. So Mr. Negrini talked about, at least one of the options that is on the list will affect our general fund budget to the tune of $7.5+ million. So if we're not going to raise that through taxes, to Mr. Negrini's point, the only way to come up with the funds to cover the staffing costs is to look at the programmatic options that we have as a district and eliminate those. Money doesn't come from anywhere else, and you all know that our personnel costs are most of our budget. So we can build a new elementary school, and we can remodel Southern, and we can do all of those things, but it comes at a cost to the programmatic offerings that we will be able to have moving forward. That's the point that I'm trying to make, and I would not recommend that as the superintendent of the school district to put that on the table with the understanding that we're going to have to take away very important programs to the community and to the students in this district, we would have to take those away if we did not tax to the index and exceptions for the next 5 years. I also do agree that we should not make the assumption that a future board is going to agree with those tax millage exception increases, because boards shift, philosophies on the board shift. The charge of this administration was 2 things. Number 1, to bring forth options to this board that, although they may not check every single box, they create the situation to take care of the capacity increases that we are going to see, the student enrollment increases we're going to see over time at the elementary level. That was priority number 1, to Dr. Kennedy's point. We have to have space for elementary students to come to our district. Number 2 was to create choice for the board on whether the program was a 5-6 program or a 7-8, or 5-6 or a 7-8 programmatic model, or a 6-7-8, 6-7-8 programmatic model. Whether or not it was a K4 or a K5, or a K1, K1, K4, K5. Those were the options that were brought forward because those are the ones that make sense, and put in working with Christine over the course of the last several months, put the district in good financial standing moving forward, so that the decisions that we are asking this board to make are good decisions based on good information that set the district up for the next 15 or 20 years, so that future boards don't get handicapped by decisions made to add to the general fund budget that we cannot continue to support within the confines of our tax millage structure. So whatever the direction of the board is from this point forward, we just need to know what it is you would like to have more information on. That's why we thought that narrowing it down based on board input to 2 choices, whatever those 2 choices might be, that we could go out to our community and say, here's the thinking of the board. We would like to see what your thoughts are on these options, and then bring that information back to the board on May 3rd for further conversation. Ultimately, we're going to have to make a decision. And there aren't unlimited options for us to consider, because we have limited resources. And that's the piece I want to keep coming back to. The conservative nature of my leadership is, we can do anything if you want to spend $140 million, but I don't think we want to do that. We want to do it in a situation where we can pay off our debt in a reasonable amount of time, as per RBC's recommendations. 20 years is a good window of time to clear that debt off the books. To be able to set up the boards in the future, 10 years from now, to make some considerations to possibly wrap additional debt where they don't increase the debt service load in our school district. So I'm not sure, President Hart, what you would like the administration to consider, but we need to have some sort of direction from the board as to what to continue to prepare to share with the community, because I'm afraid if we go out to the community with 5 different options, we're not going to get a whole lot of clarity.
You're not understanding what I'm saying. I don't think we need to take 5 options to the community. We need to take programmatic or philosophical K1 building versus a 5-6 or 7-8. I don't think we can answer that question. I can't. I think that's what we need to do, not present 5 options to the community, present thoughts what do you feel, how, information on an early learning center versus a K-5, K-4, a 6 through 8, another building, just what are people thinking? Is 700 or 1,100 too big for an elementary school or a middle school?
I think if you put it out to the community just like that, you're going to get uninformed, off-the-cuff reactions from people, rather than having like the information of what, like, and Mr. Martin said it as well, what do those structural changes actually look like when put into place? So if we could get presented with that and then put that out to the community, then I think they'd be able to make an informed, as would we, decision on what the best path to go forward is.
I'm agreeing with that, because I was originally looking at the 2A structure, then I heard, I kind of leaned away from that. I just don't know what to do. And that's why I think we need more information on the K1, and then on the 4 the 1A and 2, the 1 and 2. Because I don't know.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying in reference to more information. So if I heard correctly, so if we go to a K1 center model, what are the implications to the families across the district? And articulate those changes. So what that would mean, I mean, I know we need to flush this out. What that would mean is that every kindergartner in first grade would go to one building, and we would have to redistrict. All of these models that we're talking about are going to require that we do redistricting in our school district.
Right, but I was thinking more from like a data point, like to look at districts that have implemented either of these systems, what has been the outcome of that? Because I think that's the tangible end of the road that people need to be able to see to be able to make that kind of informed decision. Oh, well, this is going to boost our whatever, or cut back on X, Y, and Z. I think if people can see that sort of real world data, then I think they can grasp the decision-making process around it a little better.
So the benefits of K1 early learning education as they apply to finance and educational outcomes. And we can provide that information very simply because it does exist at the national level. So as a parent, I would ask this question. So I know that it's going to improve my students' learning to be in a K1 environment, and I know it's going to eliminate the need for special needs costs in the future. Is that enough information for them to determine to send their kid from their current neighborhood school to a different school? Is that going to be what they need to hear?
I'm not sure you're going to be able to find studies that are going to tell you that, because I'm not sure there's enough buildings that are just K1 and do those kinds of longitudinal studies that will get that data available for you. I mean, I'm sure there's some.
Yeah, there's actually national data that isn't from individual school districts, but organizations that have collected it longitudinally as evidence, as Mr. Schneider was saying, how much less is the remedial cost if a student were to attend an early learning program? How much less is the, cost of intervention if they were to attend an early learning program? Those types of things.
Like a specific K1 school.
Unfortunately,
I mean,
what we need is somewhere that has a K1 school, get the feedback from them. I don't care about national organizations because they play with monopoly money. Unfortunately, they come up with it's not a scientific approach. It's, well, if this happens, then we'll save money here. If that happens, that's just monopoly money. So I would, getting back, I want to see I don't know how many K1 schools there are. I mean, Does anybody know how many K1?
I mean, I think if we could just sum it up, I think we all need some time to digest this. I mean, this is a lot, to your point initially, but not too much time. I don't think we're ready for surveys for the community, but I think maybe we spin this into what are the community's questions, and then maybe bubble that up to answering them. But I don't think it's sort of like put a survey out after today and then pick what the community chooses. And to everyone's point, we need more information on pros and cons.
So there is a school district in the Dauphin area that has a K1 learning, K1 center, and then a 2, 3, 4, 5 elementary school. And that school district is Derry Township. I was the superintendent of that school district, and that model worked very well in that community. But that model was a change for that community when they built that K1 center, because it used to be a K5 elementary school. And they chose to separate K1 out in a separate building because of the items that Dr. Stout is referring to in terms of the research and the efficacy and the efficiency of pooling those K1 interventions all in one place with reading specialists, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a school district very close to us that does have that model. Now, obviously, it's a smaller district and it has a different clientele, population, demographics, and all of those things factor into the educational outcomes. So I don't know that we're going to be able to tell you exactly what's going to happen in our community because we don't have that environment in our community. I think it's a huge expectation to say, tell us what the outcomes are going to be of a K1 school in Wilson School District, because we don't have it. The only thing we can look at is the national level data that shows us what they found by these longitudinal analyses of these particular grade levels. And working in a different way with K1 has produced some significant cost savings across the continuum of K-12 education in the areas of remedial and special education services. Now, what's that going to translate to in Wilson? I don't know what those dollars are going to be. I would be making a guess. And it's not monopoly money. This is national level research.
I know how that stuff works.
It's not monopoly. It's national level research.
They take a set of, if this kid doesn't do this, that means he won't do this down the line. There's no scientific evidence. Let me give you an example. I'm a CPA. There's over 5,000 CPAs in Pennsylvania. And if you remember, after Trump got elected, one CPA in Pennsylvania stated that the whole thing is wrong. One CPA went on TV, you probably saw the announcement that it has all these negative benefits. Do you know how many letters were written about that? Because one person spoke up of over 5,000. You can't have one person, once again, that was done based on if this happens and you make this amount of money, if you have 4 children, this is going to happen. You don't know the parameters, how they came up with that number. So everything has a parameter, everything has a basis. Just like I said a million times, figures don't lie, but liars figure a lot. So you can twist anything you want, not anybody on this board, I wasn't referring that to people on the board. I'm just saying, I can take the worst number in the world and spin it to the positive.
Mr. Martin, I just wanted to let you know that the resources that we use are white papers from very reputable institutions like Rutgers University that have institutes for the National Association for the Education of Young Children that are national, large-scale research organizations.
I get that, but how
So
they...
It's not a single source.
Well, okay, we're getting way out of line. I mean, not out of line, but I was referencing to the presentation you made the other night, where you had one economics person come out and say, this and this, this, you save all this, if you do this, you do that. I can get 9 other people say it's not gonna happen. You know what I'm saying?
And that one TED Talk that I referenced was just one
Right.
example
But I'm saying,
of multiple
that's
resources
what,
that I offer.
that's why I said, I need more information. I'm trying to collect as much data and make an educated decision. I don't know if 5 or 7 is best. I don't know if K1 is best. I can't make a decision tonight.
So in terms of next steps, let me throw this out there. So I can develop a survey to send to our community to determine whether or not they support the 6, 7, 8 structure that currently exists, or they would potentially support a 5, 6, 7, 8 structure, and we can outline the benefits of both. I can send out, as part of that survey, to the community whether or not they support a K1 structure in a specific location, or and the benefits of that, and whatever data that we can come up with that can at least share that on a large scale. And then I can share the current model where we have the neighborhood school process, and also communicate the fact that with whatever is done, it's going to require some level of redistricting across the district. I could put that together, get that out, bring that back to the board for further discussion, whether we do it in another work session or not. At least you'll have that information to decipher and discuss as a full board before you make any sort of commitment to how you, as a board consensus, would like to direct administration to move forward. Does that sound like something that the board would be?
Well, since I've been speaking so much, that's what I'm asking for. I want to make sure, I can't go talk to people if I don't know what decision I'm going to make. So I need to know the pros and cons of those various 1A, A, B, whatever those.
I agree with you, Mike, but all the data and all the information we present, we also, in addition to that, to Mr. Case's point, he came in 3.5 years ago thinking 5, 6, 7, 8, and he spoke to the people in the community. He talked to students, and he talked to the people around him, and the southern community and the west community. And he's one person that changed his mind talking to the community, and that's in addition to throwing the information out there. We, as a board of 9, must still talk to the community and get that information, because I find that very, the information presented was great. So does that give you direction on what we need to do? Is the board happy with how Dr. Faley outlined that?
Okay. We'll come back at another meeting, and we're going to have somebody do the K1, the pros and cons, and then somebody's going to tell us about the pros and cons of the 5, 6.
Yep. We'll put together a pros of this approach, and the cons of this approach, the pros of this, whatever. We'll put all of that together, and we'll bring that back with community input, so that when we do make a decision, the board feels comfortable with
I don't want
the
to
data.
go out to the community yet, so I understand it. I mean, nothing should be going out until the board has a full understanding of this.
Mike, I think it's just from a standpoint of some changes, not necessarily the pros and cons from an educational standpoint. I think
Correct.
it's more or less, would you be open to the idea of changing a model such as a K1, elementary center, as such as a 5, 6 building as opposed to what we currently have, starting with that from a macro standpoint, and then we can delve into more of the philosophical benefits of, that type of learning environment. I think that's what we're looking for.
I do think that the public could, the community could probably think of pros and cons we can't even think of right now.
Right.
I'd also like to add, if we can see some data points on a survey to the staff as well.
Lupe had a
I'm
good
including
idea there.
staff as part of our community.
So
They're
I
an
would-
important
Yeah,
part of it.
separate.
It would be helpful if it was separate.
All right, you have your direction. Any other questions, comments from the board? Again, I want to thank you for all that you and your team have put into this. And remember, we do have an executive session.
It's a lot of information to digest, I would agree with that. We've been living it for the better part of a year now, so we're much closer to it than you are at this point. So anything we can do to provide clarity, we're going to do that.
No one can ever say we did this on a whim, ever.
Thank you again to you and your team, and remember, we do have an executive session following this meeting tonight. And we will not be reconvening. Anything else?
All right, so we can gavel out. Steph, you're going to have to come in on the other link for executive.
I think they can stay in, because, oh, she got out, never mind.